Ready? Okay, I'm going to start today off by a quote from American author Joyce Meyer. The quote is, 5 minutes of communicating can save a year's worth of turmoil and misunderstanding. Good communication is one of the key skills to learn to have a healthy and successful life. Similar to mortar when placing bricks, there are different aspects of communication that are the glue to making a good, effective communicator. I learned a lot of these skills over the semester, but today I'm going to talk about 5 of them. Those 5 are communication competence, self-esteem, the difference between recency and primacy effect, egocentrism, and how euphemisms are used in today's communication. The first new tool that I learned was communication competence, and there are 5 characteristics of being a competent communicator. They are self-awareness, adaptability, empathy, cognitive complexity, and ethics. And also in today's day and age, you have to know how to be a competent online communicator. These 5 characteristics force you to look inward at your own communication skills, but also give you a framework to gauge other people's communication skills and be able to kind of assess where they're at and where you're at and to be able to communicate effectively. I think communication competence is important because it's where my communication journey began. It gave me a framework, again, to assess mine and other people's communication, and it also was an important stepping stool to move forward with communication. Author Thomas Kempis had a quote. He said, "The loftier the building, the stronger the foundation will be." So communication competence was the foundation, and to be able to communicate effectively, you need confidence, which leads to the second tool that I learned about, which was self-esteem. Even though self-esteem isn't a learned skill, it's directly correlated to how we communicate. Typically, when I think of self-esteem, I think of someone as having low or no self-esteem. There's also a flip side to people who can be too cocky and have a lot of self-esteem. Both can be detrimental to communication, whether you speak up a lot or you don't talk at all. I also learned that how we perceive other people's self-esteem is also a direct impact to how we communicate. For example, if you walk into a room, someone is talking a lot and they seem intelligent, that can affect the way you see yourself and can deter you from contributing anything to a conversation. I think being able to assess self-esteem is important because internally recognizing self-esteem can help with whether you speak up more or less. As someone who has struggled with self-esteem issues, it's kind of cool to recognize how in certain situations I can be holding myself back in situations where I should be speaking up more. And it also helps me to gauge other people's self-esteem, and I can adapt accordingly to meet them where they're at communication-wise. Going hand in hand with self-esteem, in terms of thinking about ourselves and how we communicate, the way we leave impressions and how we internalize those impressions, those interactions, aid in good communication. So the third tool that I learned this year in my toolbox is knowing the difference between primacy effect and recency effect when leaving impressions. Impressions are critical to how we are perceived by other people. The primacy and recency effects can help determine how we leave those impressions. So basically, primacy effect is people who value first impressions over any other impressions. Like if you make a good first impression, then you're set with that person or that interaction that you had. And on the flip side, recency effect puts emphasis on the foremost reactions, so the freshest reactions that you have with people. I plan to use this knowledge in 2 different ways. So the first would be with job interviews and using the primacy effect, where that first impression is key. That first impression, that even though if you have like a good resume, that first impression is key to snagging a job. But the second way I plan to use it is with the recency effect, is with friendship and family. Growing relationships is hard work, and it's an everyday thing. And putting emphasis on those freshest interactions is important because that puts emphasis on the day in and day out struggles of building good relationships. Something that makes impressions lasting is our perception of people. There's a quote that ties impressions to perception, and my next tool that I'm going to be talking about. And that quote is by Sir Christian Goldman Ammon. It's that egocentrism has no charisma. So the next part of my toolbox is a term called egocentrism. When I first heard the term egocentrism, I thought it meant only being rude and selfish, but it's not really about that at all. It's about how we perceive things. It's actually, the definition of it is the inability to see someone else's point of view. The term walk a mile in my own shoes comes to mind. It's a skill that children really have problems with because they only see things one way, but adults can also struggle with it. You think about politicians nowadays and how their agendas can blind them to seeing other points of view. But I think it's important that if people just took the time and put a little bit of effort into seeing other people's point of view, communication would be a lot easier. With an egotistical mindset, or egocentric mindset, things that need to be said can oftentimes get lost in the haze of assumptions. This is something I struggle with a lot too, assuming and not putting in effort to see where other people are coming from, and that is something that I'm working on. People can assume way too much and can assume that we mean to say one thing when we really mean another thing, and the last tool can kind of be a cause of that if it's used in the wrong way. So the last skill is how to use euphemisms. And euphemisms are interesting because of the society that we live in. My textbook, I thought this was funny, it called it soft talk, right? So euphemisms can be similar to political correctness in a sense where anything we say can offend someone. And people can get lost in their image, and the way they say something can make them look better than who they are. So examples of euphemisms can be like, if you're firing someone, you're letting someone go. It takes the blame off of you. In terms of genocide, it's like collateral damage, or in terms of war. I think euphemisms should only be used when it's important and appropriate. So when you're making a joke and humor, it can be okay, but not if you're in a professional setting and you're talking to your boss. It's probably best to be straightforward. And it's also important and appropriate in different societies because they have different language cultures where they use their own kind of euphemisms, and it's important to respect their cultures and use the kind of language that they do. So to conclude, I learned about 5 different types of communication skills that made up my communication toolbox. They were communication competence, self-esteem, the primacy and recency effects, egocentrism, and how to use euphemisms. And to close the day, I'm going to close with a quote by Nat Turner: "Good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity."